Welcome back to Data Science at Home podcast. I'm Francesco, and as a former security researcher, I think I feel the urge of sharing some of the information that I know, and of course are related to the concept of privacy for normal people, let's say, but of course also journalists and activists who seem to be very much married to the concept of security provided by Apple devices. So it would be nice to clarify in this episode, hopefully in less than 30 minutes, what is the state of the art and what has happened, in fact, in the past and what is actually happening, and definitely what will happen if you keep using certain devices. So the very first thing I want to clarify is that, there's no phone that actually prevents anyone from violating your privacy. With enough time and enough money, at least that's what we learned when we were playing with privacy and security at university and during my PhD, there's absolutely no device that is that can resist certain types of attacks and malware, and also what we call zero-day attacks, which are those attacks that even the manufacturer of the device is not aware of. Now, I want to start this episode with a very simple question. When you think of a private phone, a phone that protects you, what do you think? Well, you typically think of a phone that doesn't spy on you, doesn't hand your life over to governments and corporations. Most people typically picture an iPhone as the de facto standard that provides you such type of security. Now, that, of course, is probably one of the greatest marketing achievements of the 21st century, because the iPhone is, in many measurable ways, of course, the preferred platform for so-called state-sponsored surveillance. And not because Apple is uniquely evil, as many might think, but because the same thing that makes iOS look secure to the average consumer is the exact property that makes it irresistible to intelligence agencies and spyware vendors. It's kind of a walled garden, right? A controlled, locked down, standardized environment. And when you crack a walled garden, you own everything that is inside it, right? So today I'm going to talk about a number of things, among which Paragon Solutions, which is the Israeli spyware firm that hacked fully updated iPhones, iPhones running the latest version of iOS, without the victims clicking a single link or opening a single attachment. I'm also going to talk about Apple's growing collection of companies that read your facial micro-expressions, for example, decode, as they say, your silent speech, and listen even when you think no one is listening. I'm going to talk about what it means to actually have a private phone in 2026, and I'm going to expose the Apple privacy brand for exactly what it is: a beautifully designed illusion. So grab your coffee, this one is going to sting a little bit. Okay, so the ethical spyware company that we know of, or some of us know, Paragon. So let's talk about Paragon Solutions. If you haven't heard of them, you will. And if you have heard of them, you probably know them as the NSO group, but nicer. At least that's their own pitch. Now, Paragon was founded in 2019 by a guy I cannot even spell, Yud Schneerson or Schneerson, whatever. You can Google that. Who is a former commander of Unit 18200, which is Israel's elite signals intelligence unit, pretty much the equivalent of the NSA's hacking division. Along with co-founders and former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak as a backer. Of course, these are not amateurs who stumbled into spyware business. overnight. These are people who built their entire careers cracking communication systems for nation states. And when I say that, I want to stress on this. These are not regular people or regular organizations. These are organizations that work for governments. Their product is called Graphite, even though many people think that Paragon is the name of the software. No, Paragon Solutions is the name of the company. Graphite is the name of the software. And they market it as a lawful intercept tool, quote unquote, surveillance software sold exclusively to vetted democratic governments for legitimate law enforcement purposes, right? Now, the tagline is essentially, we're not like those other spyware companies. We have ethics, we have guardrails, and we only sell to the good guys. Kind of, I'm kind of translating the semantic meaning of their tagline. Now, what happened is that in December 2024, a U.S. private equity firm called AE Industrial Partners acquired Paragon for approximately $500 million. The surveillance for hire industry is no longer in the shadows. Now it's actually on Wall Street. So it's not a secret. Many governments are clients of this company. So now let's talk about what Graphite actually does, and more importantly, who it was used against, because they did. Now, zero click, your phone gets hacked while you sleep, which is not an exaggeration. It's a kind of a nightmare scenario that security researchers have been warning about for years. I have to be honest that when I was doing security research, all these things were kind of a dream for attackers. And we researchers, or very few researchers, had actually idea of, even if those things were actually possible. With hindsight, we were wrong. They are very possible, and I'm 100% sure because they already happened. So this is a nightmare scenario, as I said, and that has now been confirmed in the real world. There have been cases also in Italy. In January 2025, a journalist, imagine this scenario, you're a journalist, your iPhone is fully updated, is running, I don't know, what was back in the days, iOS 18.2 point something, which was the latest version available at the time, one year ago. Imagine that you haven't clicked any suspicious links, you haven't opened any weird attachments, you're just operating your phone as usual. You haven't installed anything from outside the App Store. You have done everything right, okay? And your phone is already compromised. So this is what happened actually. At least two European journalists confirmed forensically by the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto in a landmark report that has been published in June of the same year, 2025. I'm speaking about Italian journalist Ciro Pellegrino, head of the Naples newsroom at funpage.it, which is a very nice website, by the way, and an anonymous prominent European journalist were both found to have had their iPhones infected with Paragon's Graphite spyware. And one of them had been compromised since January 2025, the other since early February. The attack vector was iMessage, Apple's own messaging system. I'm sure that everybody who has an iPhone knows what I'm talking about. And the exploit, which has been tracked as a CVE 2025-43200, that's the number of the CVE, essentially was a logic flaw in how iOS processed a photo or a video shared through an iCloud link. And also iCloud, you probably know what I'm talking about if you have an iPhone. It's essentially the cloud service that allows you to store or even back up your entire content of your phone in the cloud, so it's always available and you can make migrations from one iPhone to the next one you will purchase next year, and so on. Now, the attacker sent the malicious content to the victim The phone processed it automatically, as it usually does, and that's it. The spyware was installed. The victim knew nothing. Now, Citizen Lab calls this a zero-click attack. It's not a 0-day, it's a zero-click. So no clicks required, no user error, no phishing. The phone just gets owned, okay? Owning a phone is in the jargon is like you don't own your phone anymore because it has been attacked by a spyware that can do pretty much anything. Once installed, Graphite can access your messages, including Signal and WhatsApp. And you know that Signal is known to be a super secure app, which it is. But of course, once the spyware has access to the text that is going to be rendered on your screen, that's not encrypted. And so all these encryption capabilities of all these super secure apps pretty much vaporized. It also have access to the call logs, photos, contacts, your location, your microphone, camera feeds. Every app on your device becomes a window that Paragon's client can look through, right? Your phone has been silently converted into literally a full spectrum surveillance device. You have absolutely no idea. So what happened next was that Apple, they found out and they patched the vulnerability in iOS 18.3, I think 18.3.1. That happened in February 2025. But the journalists were already compromised by then. And now, there is a detail about this story, is that these journalists were running the latest available iOS at the time they were hacked. There is no version of Keep Your Phone Updated that would have saved them because the exploit was a 0-day, which was unknown to Apple, actively being used against real people. Now, forensic analysis found that both attacks were linked to the same Paragon operator, identified by researchers as Attacker 1, an iMessage account used to fire the exploit at both targets. The same customer, presumably with a single government contract, was systematically targeting journalists from the same Italian newsroom, right? Now, here's where the story gets pretty ugly. Italy's Parliamentary Intelligence Oversight Committee, so-called COPASIR, confirmed in June 2025 that the Italian government had, in fact, used Paragon's graphite to spy on two activists, Luca Casarini and Giuseppe Caccia, founders of Mediterranean Saving Humans, which is an NGO that rescues migrants in the Mediterranean Sea. These were not criminals. These were not terrorists. These were, people rescuing drowning migrants. A democratic EU member state was using a $500 million Israeli-American spyware to monitor NGO workers. Okay, this is on the news. This is fact. It has been confirmed, even though, of course, the government, never clarified. The Italian government, of course. Now, after this scandal broke, Paragon did something they never did before. They terminated the contract with Italy, which is either a noble act of corporate ethics, if we can still believe there is any, or, and the doubt here is pretty high, an excellent PR move to demonstrate to their other clients that they are, the good guys because they take abuse seriously. Of course, depending on how cynical you are feeling. I'm very malicious in my thinking for a good reason. Now, of course, Italy rejected Paragon's offer to help investigate the case, citing national security concerns. That's what they typically do when they don't want to disclose things or they cannot disclose things. The whole thing turned into a diplomatic mess that is still unresolved as we speak. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration is reportedly a Paragon customer. And the Trump administration, after briefly pausing a $2 million ICE contract with Paragon under Biden administration, reinstated it. And by August 2025, ICE had the green light to use graphite again. And in October 2025, ICE Director publicly stated that they would use new surveillance capabilities to track anti-IS protesters and so-called professional agitators, whatever that means. There was even a reporter, Rachel Maddow, warned publicly that Paragon spyware can be covertly installed on anyone's phone from a drone hovering over a protest, which is quite crazy. Now, of course, all the things that I'm saying are no longer hypothetical. Okay, this is operational. All right, so I want to make sure that we understand how practical these things became. So why spyware loves the iPhone? And the question I think we should ask is, doesn't Paragon target Android too? Which is a fair question. And the answer is technically yes, but practically iOS is the preferred and confirmed platform. And here's why this matters architecturally and from a technical perspective. The Citizen Lab analysis of Paragon's Android infections found a forensic artifact called Big Pretzel, all capitalized, a marker that uniquely identifies graphite on Android devices. They found it on some Android phones belonging again to Italian activists, but, and this is critical, when they analyzed the Android device of Francesco Cancellato, the editor of fanpage.it, who was also reportedly targeted via WhatsApp, they could not get any forensic confirmation of a successful infection. And why is that? It's because Android's logging system is quite sparse compared to iOS. Android doesn't keep the detailed system logs that iOS does, which means forensic investigators have less to work with, but it also means from an attacker's perspective, Android leaves fewer clean breadcrumbs to follow. So the spyware potentially runs, but it's harder to confirm, harder to attribute, and critically, harder to develop reliable zero-click exploits for. So here's the deeper technical reason why iOS is the premium surveillance target. So iOS is, in fact, a monoculture, okay? Every iPhone runs essentially the same software stack, the same iMessage implementation, the same photo processing libraries. If you find a vulnerability in iMessage on one iPhone, it works on virtually every other iPhone in the world. The attack surface, we say, is uniform, is predictable, and enormous by market share because a lot of people buy iPhones, which is indeed a spyware developer's dream. You develop it once, you deploy millions of times. Android, as I'm showing now, is quite the opposite. It's a fragmented ecosystem. We have different manufacturers, different software versions, different custom layers on top. So a zero-click exploit that works, for example, on a Samsung Galaxy S25 may not work on a Pixel 10, which may not work on a, OnePlus 15 and any other phones out there. So each is a separate engineering problem, all right? So this is the part that most people miss. The reason Paragon specifically thrives on iOS isn't just the monoculture. It's also the locked bootloader. Okay, what that means is that Apple's security pitch is that because you cannot modify iOS, because you cannot install software from outside the Apple Store, because the operating system is cryptographically verified from boot to runtime, your device is secure. Okay, that's how they claim. And that's true for a certain definition of secure, of course. But the same locked bootloader that prevents you from installing a custom operating system also prevents you from inspecting the operating system that you have. So essentially, you cannot audit iOS. You cannot modify how iMessage works. You cannot remove the attack surface. Okay? You are completely dependent on Apple, a single private company, to find and patch every vulnerability before spyware vendors do. And as we have just seen, sometimes Apple doesn't win that race. The lockdown walled garden that looks like security is actually a single point of failure. And when it fails completely, and you have no fallback. That's the biggest problem. Now, The devices that are actually harder to target, and again, I want to be clear here, okay? No phone is unhackable, right? Nation-state spyware vendors have budgets that dwarf most security research operations. So this is a very interesting and very important preamble that I have to make. But of course, there is a meaningful difference between a phone that costs $5 million in 0 days to compromise and one that costs $500,000. Now, Graphene OS on a Google Pixel is currently the most defensible consumer smartphone platform available. And you read that right. The phone that is hardest to spy on is built by Google and runs on Android, which is quite ironic, but I'll explain you why. This is very, very possible. Graphene OS adds security hardening that goes well beyond what any mainstream operating system offers. All right. For example, memory protection that wipes sensitive data immediately after use, closing entire classes of use after free vulnerabilities. I don't want to be super technical today. I want normal people to understand what I'm talking about. But essentially, when you have some kind of memory violation and you have data still in memory, you can access this data. If you wipe the memory, even if you have a memory violation, you have nothing to attack or nothing to spy on because this data has been wiped, essentially. Disabling dangerous features like dynamic code execution by default, there is a hardened malloc memory allocation feature that prevents heap memory corruption, a form of memory corruption. There is per-connection MAC address randomization that prevents network tracking. There is USB connection blocking when the screen is locked, which is very important, both at the hardware and software levels, unlike, of course, stock Android, which only does it at the operating system level. But there is a key architectural difference in the bootloader. Google Pixel phones support relocking the bootloader after installing a custom operating system. And you know what this means? Well, it means that you can install Graphene OS, okay, lock the bootloader back, and have Android's fully verified boot security. The same cryptographic chain of trust that Apple uses, but with a completely different operating system underneath. This is not possible on an iPhone because the only operating system that you can install on the iPhone is iOS, and that's because the bootloader cannot be unlocked. Otherwise, you have to jailbreak your phone, which becomes, I think it's illegal, and plus many other security applications like your bank application would definitely stop working. Now, this means, as I said, you can install Graphene OS and get verified by the bootloader. Now, Graphene OS is an operating system that, in addition to all these beautiful things, also has no Google services. There is no telemetry, no analytics, no cloud sync unless you explicitly configure it, and no iMessage equivalent attack surface. Okay, so it's a very stripped version of Android that doesn't have all the things that start making connections without you knowing. And critically, as security researcher Stanislav Kazanov put it, if a spyware vendor attempts to use a standard Android exploit chain against a target with Graphene OS on it, it must burn an entirely different exploit that is exponentially more scarce. All right? The research and development cost to develop working spyware for Graphene OS is dramatically higher than for iOS or stock Android, which means that in practice that you are not worth the budget of being attacked. It becomes so expensive and so complicated that it's not convenient. Now, another thing is that Graphene OS also lets you disable the cellular modem at the hardware level. So your phone literally cannot communicate with the cell tower, all right? And You can air gap applications completely, give an app network permission for only one session and then revoke it. You can run Google Play apps in an isolated sandbox so that even if you install an app that would normally phone home to Google, it runs in a quarantined environment with no access to your real identity or data. Now, of course, if you log in on Google services and you do stuff, Google can still see what you do because you're logged in there. There's no phone that can prevent you from that. If you access Google Cloud with your identity and you start, putting your data on Google servers, well, there's no phone that can prevent you from that. So this is what actual security looks like. It's not beautiful design. It's not a premium unboxing experience, but it's actual, verifiable, open source, auditable security. Okay? Now, let me switch gear to Apple's face reading empire. Let's talk about Apple's acquisitions, because even if we set Paragon aside entirely, even if we accept Apple's claim that they are fighting spyware, not enabling it, there is a separate, quieter story that is being built through Apple's corporate M&A, mergers and acquisition activity. And it tells a very different story about what Apple's devices are being designed to do. So let me trace the timeline for you, and let's move to this slide here. So let's start from 2013, acquisition of PrimeSense, an Israeli company whose 3D sensing technology originally powered the Microsoft Kinect. Inside Apple, this technology became the foundation for Face ID. That thing that allows you to unlock your phone with your face. And the feature of this product is the ability to map your face in 3 dimensions with about 30,000 infrared points, right? Apple's first Israeli tech acquisition was PrimeSense. The same founder, Aviad Meisels, remember this name because it would become relevant again later. 2016, Emotion, a company whose entire business was detecting human emotions from facial expressions in real time. Their system was called Faceit, built on the work of psychologist Paul Ekman, also Jewish, the pioneer of micro-expression analysis, the same science used in lie detection research. Okay? The emotion's pitch was the following: discern the most subtle expression changes and translate that into a defined emotional reaction. Now, why does Apple need real-time emotion detection? That's a question that actually Apple has never publicly answered. But the technology is now inside the company, presumably integrated into some future product. And since that happened in 2016, I pretty much believe that part of that technology is currently on the iPhones that you have today. In 2017, RealFace. Apple acquires RealFace, another Israeli startup specializing in AI-driven facial recognition and identification. This acquisition, combined with PrimeSense, forms the core of Face ID as we know it today. Okay, so that's what happened historically. Then we had in 2024 Data Calab or Data K-Lab, whatever. It's a French company, French computer vision startup that deployed AI tools in Paris transportation systems to monitor mask compliance during the pandemic. Remember, 2024. Efficiency, privacy by design, they called it. But the use case was monitoring people's face in public transit. Worth noting, very important in my opinion. Now let's jump to 2026, the very recent one, which was announced, it happened in January and it has confirmed now, QAI. It's another Israeli startup, and these Israeli startups are amazing. Apple spent approximately $2 billion to acquire this company. That's Apple's second largest acquisition ever after Beats. Now, what's QAI? QAI's website had exactly one line of copy which I quote, "In a world full of noise, we craft a new kind of quiet," which is kind of poetic, all right? Now, what does QAI actually do? Patents filed by QAI reveal technology being used in headphones or glasses using facial skin micro movements for non-verbal communication. The system essentially analyzes the tiny movements of your jaw, lips, and facial muscles to understand what you're saying, even if you are whispering. Even if you're saying nothing out loud, they claim that they can capture that. So essentially, it's a technology that can decode silent speech. So think about that for a moment. Your AirPods or your Apple glasses reading the micro movements of your face to understand what you're thinking about saying. Silent speech detection, right? Ambient biometric surveillance at the most intimate level imaginable. Now, not your location, not your messages, but the words forming in your head before you speak them, right? Guess who's QAI's CEO? Aviad Meisels, the same founder who sold PrimeSense to Apple in 2013. Remember the guy I asked you to keep in mind. And whose technology became Face ID. So, this guy described the vision in terms that should make every privacy advocate sit up straight. He said, "In an era where human communication is everything, we have found a way to take it to the next level, enabling extremely high bandwidth, unprecedented privacy, accessibility, multilingualism, and more. Biology can only take us so far. QAI will do the rest." Think about that, okay? Biology can only take us so far. It's a remarkable sentence. What comes after biology when it comes to extracting your inner monologue is a machine that reads your face to finish your thoughts, right? Now, Apple's official spin is that this will power smarter AirPods and better Siri, and maybe that's all it is, but let's put this in context. Apple has now spent more than a decade systematically acquiring this type of technologies, 3D facial mapping technology, real-time emotion detection from facial expressions, advanced facial recognition and identification, computer vision for public surveillance use cases, and now technology that decodes speech from facial micro movements without sound. You know, I don't think it's a coincidence. It's kind of a roadmap, in my opinion. The device in your pocket is being upgraded, acquisition by acquisition, into a biometric surveillance platform of extraordinary sophistication. Whether Apple uses it for advertising, for government cooperation, or simply keeps it locked on device as a feature, the capability is being assembled, right? Now, Apple complies every time. Now, here's the most important thing to understand about Apple's privacy brand. It's not false, it's just incomplete. Apple does do things other companies don't. All right? They fought the FBI, for example, in 2016 over unlocking a terrorist's iPhone. They built end-to-end encryption into iMessage and FaceTime. They introduced app tracking transparency, which actually hurt Facebook's ad business so badly that Meta lost tens of billions in market cap. These are real, okay? These are full acts. But privacy as a marketing strategy and privacy as a security architecture are two completely different things. And Apple has become extraordinarily good at conflating them. So now let's look at the actual compliance reality. Apple receives tens of thousands of government data requests every year from dozens of countries. They comply with legally valid warrants and court orders for iCloud data. Their transparency report confirms that when governments ask for iCloud content with the right legal paperwork, they get it. iCloud backups are not end-to-end encrypted by default. Pay attention to that. They're encrypted by Apple, which means that Apple can read them. And governments with the right court order can read them too. In 2021, Apple announced the CSAM scanning system, if someone remembers that. It's software that would scan photos on your iPhone before they were backed up to iCloud, comparing them against a database of known illegal images. The ACLU and EFF both sounded the alarm immediately. Apple was proposing to put a client-side scanning system inside every iPhone. Even if the stated purpose was child safety, the architecture was pretty much indistinguishable from a general-purpose surveillance tool. The same system with a different database could scan pretty much anything, from political content to protest images, encrypted messages. Apple eventually shelved the plan under pressure, but the fact that they built that feature tells you something about how they think about the boundary between their device and government requests. And then there's Apple Intelligence, announced at the Development Conference 2024 and rolled out through 2025. Apple Intelligence is Apple's AI system. It's basically Siri on steroids, powered partly by on-device models and partly by Apple's private cloud compute infrastructure. Apple's marketing is confident. Your data is processed privately, Apple cannot see it, and it never leaves your control. Now, research presented at the Black Hat 2025 by Israeli cybersecurity firm Lumia Security, told a completely different story. They said Apple Intelligence routinely transmits sensitive user data to Apple servers beyond what its privacy policies indicate. Siri sends the content of dictated messages, including WhatsApp messages, to Apple servers, even when users have explicitly disabled Siri's ability to learn from specific applications. These transmissions occur outside the private cloud compute system that Apple markets as providing enhanced protections, which means that when you dictate a message to WhatsApp through Siri, and WhatsApp's end-to-end encryption is protecting that message in transit to your recipient, Apple may already have a copy of what you said sitting on their servers. The encryption icon is, in the chat window means pretty much nothing. It's absolutely trash. If the voice recognition layer is actually leaking the content before it's encrypted, you get the point, right? I think it's a no-brainer. So that's why I call this episode the Privacy Chimera. It's real in some dimensions and hollow in others. And the dimensions where it's hollow are precisely the ones that matter most when the threat model is a nation state or a well-funded intelligence operation. So, the inconvenient truth about open platforms. Well, let me address the obvious counter-argument because it's a real one. Now I can say, well, what do you use? Android? Android is Google. Google is advertising. Google's entire business model is surveillance capitalism. That's what you would say. And how can Android-based phones be more private than an iPhone? Which is, a very correct observation. And it's also the right question to ask. Now, stock Android, the Android that you buy at the carrier store, you buy an original phone, you never change it, it comes with a stock Android, okay? That's absolutely a surveillance platform. Google knows where you are, what you search, knows what you buy, who you talk to. The Android permission system has historically been a joke. Everybody knows that, okay? This is all true. But the crucial distinction is that Apple's marketing has successfully obscured the hardware and the software are separable on Android. On an iPhone, you cannot separate Apple's hardware from Apple's software. You cannot install a different operating system. You cannot remove iMessage. You cannot audit the kernel. You take the entire package or you take nothing. So the walled garden is total. On Android, particularly on Google's own Pixel hardware, the bootloader can be unlocked a completely different operating system can be installed, and then critically the bootloader can be relocked. Okay? The hardware security chip now validates the new operating system. The device is now running open source, auditable software on verified hardware with no Google services, no Apple services, no corporate telemetry of any kind unless you explicitly configure it. This is what Graphene OS does, and it's why, somewhat paradoxically, the most privacy-respecting smartphone in 2026 is a Google Pixel running software that removes Google entirely. The open source nature of Graphene OS means anyone can audit the code, every security patch is published, the threat model is transparent. When Citizen Lab or any other security research organization wants to verify claims about Graphene OS protections, they can read the source. When they want to verify Apple's claims about private cloud compute, they're just reading a marketing copy and legal agreements. They don't have access to the source code, right? That's proprietary. Closed source and transparent are not synonyms, right? Apple would like you to think they are, but they're not. So what actually protects you? Let me be direct, because this episode is for people who want to understand things, not for people who want to, feel comfortable. If your threat model is, I don't want advertisers to track my browsing, I think that an iPhone is probably fine. If your threat model is, I don't want Google knowing my search history, I think iPhone is still fine. Apple does meaningful things at this level. If your threat model is, I'm a journalist, I'm an activist, I'm an NGO worker, a lawyer with sensitive client, a defense contractor, a politician, or anyone whose phone might be worth targeting with the $500 million in spyware capability, then an iPhone might not be sufficient. It might become a liability. The Paragon graphite attacks on European journalists happened on fully updated iPhones. The victims did nothing wrong. They were just using iMessage, which is a zero-click attack vector that exists because Apple controls the entire messaging stack and no one else can modify or replace it. So what's the actual alternatives? Well, as I said, Graphene OS on a Pixel 10 is probably the current gold standard. Full stable support confirmed. There's the Tensor G5 chip, TSMC's 3 nanometer process, which is currently the fastest, most efficient Pixel silicon ever made. The hardware is well understood. The bootloader can be relocked. Security architecture is the strongest available outside of classified systems. Of course, you lose iMessage, FaceTime, all that crap, the App Store ecosystem without workarounds, but you gain verifiable security, air-gapped apps, hardware modem control, no surveillance capitalism data pipeline, and if you are important enough to be targeted, an attack surface that costs order of magnitude more to exploit, right? So the de-Googled phone is not for everyone, I'm saying, but neither is the conversation you're having today. So now let's talk about this new kind of quiet. QAI's website tagline was, in a world full of noise, we craft a new kind of quiet, which is a beautiful line, and I want to steal it for a moment just to make a different point. In a world where your phone is reading your facial micro-expressions, decoding your silent speech, transmitting your dictated messages beyond the boundaries of end-to-end encryption, and maintaining a locked-down architecture that happens to be the preferred platform for state-sponsored spyware, quiet is not what Apple gives you. Quiet is what they sell you the feeling of. Real quiet requires a different kind of phone, one that you can verify, one that doesn't phone home, one where the attack surface has been systematically stripped away by people who publish their work publicly and get paid nothing to do it. One where when a spyware vendor tries to run their standard exploit chain against your device, the engineers have to go back to the drawing board. That quite is unglamorous. It doesn't come in obsidian or lemongrass. It doesn't have a polished unboxing experience. It doesn't run automatically when you set it up with your Apple ID, but it's real. And in 2026, that's the rarest thing in the smartphone market. So leave the walled garden and follow me for more.